Awesome. Thank you all for coming out. I'm always really happy whenever there's lightning talks and there's kind of like a cohesive narrative across all three of them. You know, usually they're not planned together at the same time, and I feel like it seems like I'm the odd man out here with, you know, there's two open source talks and then there's going to be this talk, but it actually all kind of comes together in the end. I'm really thankful for that. But that's because I already know how this talk goes and you don't yet, so let's see how that goes. So one of my kind of New Year's resolution, I'm glad I put this slide here. I'm really bad about promoting myself, like just be like, hey, you should hire me. Nice people told me to put this slide in, and everyone else did it here, so I'm going to do it too. So if you don't remember, this is a game talk, so this is actually an old game called Monkey Island that I played when I was a youngster, and he had to ask me about my Loom, which was another game made by LucasArts at the time. So ask me about my simian craft. By day, I tend to work in React and React Native these days. I've certainly worked in everything under the sun. I've been writing JavaScript before jQuery was a thing, so ask me about my Moo tools if this was 15 years ago, right? I do data visualization, mobile apps, pretty much whiz-bang in your browser. So if you want me to work on your project, you should talk to me sometime. All right. So one of my goals this year was to work on some games for myself, something I really cared about. In the past, I've given talks on Phaser, Impact, Babylon.js. I've certainly played with all the game frameworks that are out there. So very recently, Phaser 3 came out, and I was a fan of Phaser 2. It was one of the better tools, and there's a lot of improvement. So I have been working on a couple games. One of them is called Griffin, and it's sort of a kind of a spooky game based on like Oklahoma urban legends and things like that. And then Signal Overgrowth, which is going to be a demo game for a project I'm working on alongside Ben called Create Phaser App. So while I was working on these things, I've learned a few little tips. So the first one is really the bigger tip here is to use external tools, work outside of basically just your game engine. So one of them is to use Tiled. And Tiled is a map editor, and you can export JSON, and it can be consumed by Phaser, and it makes life really nice. It's just as good as anything else that's out there. Okay, great, which brings us to tip number 2. So you've used Tiled, and oh, that's kind of weird. Look, whenever he walks around, there's like this weird kind of rippling effect. Okay, well, that's related to WebGL, and you know, it's a JavaScript talk, so all these things can run on the web. So basically, there's a tool out there called Tile Extruder. And if you use it, it's going to extrude your tiles, and it's a command line process, and it'll make that go away. It'll turn this thing into this thing, and now your tile maps work again. So those are the first 2 tips. The third one is to use a texture packer. If you've never worked on a game before, what a texture packer's job to do is to take all of your sprites and stuff and kind of put them onto one sheet. So instead of making you know, a request for every single frame of your animation, you just get it all at once. And it's very smart. It can kind of look around and it knows where things are positioned, and that's what it does. So there's a free option called Shoebox, and there's a not free option called Texture Packer, which I'm going to say, like, if you really want to get stuff done and you want to save some time, go ahead and get the not free option because it has a Phaser 3 mode, which is what I'm talking about here. This is Phaser 3 tips. And if you look in the background, that is the packed sprite sheet for Signal Overgrowth, one of those 2 games. Like there's a little mech dude, you can see he's shooting here, but notice how they're all kind of rotated around, and there's just kind of like, just any space they can get it in there, that's what they're doing. So that's what that does. So it makes the smallest possible image, which is not really that small when you consider all your animations, but this one's really interesting. So you've got your level, you've got your textures, you've got your animations, and you're ready to go ahead and start coding. So one thing I'm going to recommend is to make your animations a state machine and a command pattern. So if you don't know the phrase command pattern, has anyone here heard of Redux? Right? It's a very common example of like a command pattern. You basically say, I want to, you know, and this is the way I always think about it, is like if you go to a restaurant and you're like, I want a sandwich with no tomatoes and this and this and this. The command is to go make this. You've attached a little bit of additional data to it to tell you how to execute the command, but then you don't do it. Someone else does that for you, right? So you're laughing because I'm thinking about hamburgers, and that's, aren't we all, right? Okay, so you're going to end up writing code like this your first time, where it's like, if your cursor's down, do this. If your cursor right, do this. And it's going to get really bad. So what I'm recommending instead is to kind of separate those concerns, and you basically add a bunch of states, right, to your finite state machine. And then you can add handlers if you want. And this is just an example of one I found out there. There's a lot of examples of how to do this. This is just one implementation. And then you can transition between the states. You can only be in one state at a time. So if you can just get away from the iffy code right off the bat and start with the pluggable pattern on animation, which is what I learned the hard way, you will save a lot of time. OK. And finally, the fifth tip is to use Create Phaser App, which this is where everything kind of comes together. Create Phaser App is my project, and also Benjamin Van Treese is working on it as well. And if you want to get started with Phaser 3 right now, really quick, it uses Webpack 4, Babel 7, ES6, Prettier. It has a bundle analyzer. It uses browser sync, so if you're doing mobile stuff, browser sync works. And it'll even run complexity analysis, which that project right there actually is another one of my open source projects. It's ES6 Plato. So go use my stuff. And if you want to know what it is, here's a little demo game. This is the signal overgrowth game. This is what we've got so far. It's not that amazing. So you're going to see the little banding issue. I still need to put that in. Whoop. By the way, the in-between animations, that's the thing that you really want that state machine for. I'm sorry, I was making sound effects like a toddler. Pow! That might be a good way to mock them out. I don't know. Like, pew, pew, pew. All right. That's pretty funny. And speaking of open source, I code a lot, and a lot of that is open source stuff. So let me go find the. Okay. So here's the project right here. I've already gotten pull requests from some game developer living in France. Was like, hey, I added sound support. I was like, thank you. And someone else found an issue where on Linux containers, browser sync didn't work quite right. And then Ben fixed that. So that is the boon of open source, is if everyone's working on the same thing, there's kind of a convergence. And I gave a talk some years ago about complexity, and I had a slide that said, really, all of your code is, and when I say meme, I don't mean like internet meme. I mean like, the selfish gene, Richard Dawkins, what a meme's trying to do. Meme's a unit of information, it's trying to survive. It survives by replication, right? Every time you're looking at code, you're like, can this be more abstract? Can it be something that gets replicated more and more? Or is it something that needs to be deleted? Right? And all of us are running this kind of genetic algorithm on code. And like Lodash is a very survivable organism, right? Like how many people have pulled Lodash into their projects? Well, apparently more than anyone else on NPM, right? So when you make an open source project, you're taking a piece of code, you're taking a unit, you're abstracting it, you're putting it into a position where more people can look at it, more people can improve its resiliency, and it's a more survivable thing, right? And so your idea is more survivable. And so that's another way to kind of look at why open source is interesting. And the other thing is every field has a way of doing collaboration. All of them. I mean, if you're a musician, you can either go play in a symphony or go to a jam session, and no matter what space you're in, you know what the rules of engagement are. Well, our rules of engagement are what Aaron talked about. Every single one just literally listed out. If you do this, you have to attribute me. If you do this, you're not allowed to sue me. If you do this, all your derivative work must be copyrighted. So I don't know about you, but if I were a musician, I was once. I guess I am a musician still, but went to school for it. So I would like to participate in that community. I would like to jam with my friends. I would like to write music. I'd like to go play in bands, right? So you're a programmer, so I encourage you to work on your open source projects because that is your way to go jam with your friends at this. And the best tools that we have are the result of a lot of people jamming. I don't know, I feel kind of weird saying that. So it's like a office space term. We're just going to go jam on some code. But in the context of the metaphor, it makes sense. So if you got something that you think is interesting, or there's someone else that's working on that's interesting, don't be shy. Go out there. Let them know about that bug you found. Work on their documentation. And we're all going to have very nice things if everyone does it. That's the big dream here. So that's everything I got. 5 tips. The end. Yo, I'm taking questions, so. I sure am. You got it. That was good. I think that's the answer to like a riddle or two, by the way. Yeah.
So what license did you choose for your project?
Oh, I was actually going to tell you guys that. Let's go back to GitHub. I'll just show you. The first one I looked at was MIT. Create phaser app. They moved things around on GitHub. They moved it to the other side, and I'm still just like, ugh. It'd be like if you woke up one day and we're like, we're driving on the other side of the road. I mean, I'm sure there's some really good reason for it. Okay, so license.md, you want to have one of those. Apache license version 2.0. I picked that over MIT. There's actually there's a website, I think it's called openlicense.org. I don't know, Aaron, you might know if you were doing research on this. You just pulled all that from memory? Anyway, it just bullet points every single license and the pros and cons of them, and I started with MIT because I liked it, and I saw this one. I was like, oh, it has a few more things I like, so I ended up just picking it. Copy, paste, you're done. Oh, and I will say that having things like a contributing MD, license MD, and some of these things on NPM, I don't know if you guys have noticed this. They made a change recently. Thank you, browser. So phaser, that was weird. Sorry. Okay, so you see these little metrics over here on the side? Things like test coverage, how frequently you push, and also whether or not you have a license and things like that actually affect these little scores that determine how NPM is going to rank your submission. So, by the way, there's me, working my way up. I got the bars, but I haven't been doing it as long as them, so there you go. Oh, it's P, Q, and M, which are obviously is self-evident is what NPM stands for. Maintenance, quality, and popularity, which, you know, I guess phaser boilerplate, this one's a 4% popularity, so it's just absolutely killing it. But it's not phaser 3, so that's, I can say with a pretty high degree of confidence right now that at this exact second, my phaser 3 boilerplate is the most caught up with the phaser 3 master branch and is using the latest version, as well as Babel and Webpack and all that kind of stuff. So there you go. This one's probably using, I'm guessing, either phaser E or phaser 2. It's been around for, if it's been around for a year. All right. Aaron, you had a question too, man. That's all right. Oh, that's a good question. So right now it's a boilerplate, and the goal is to convert it into a Lerna-style app similar to Create React app, where it's a mono repo, and the plugins go in a plugin folder, and then when you npm deploy, they all kind of go out at the same time. So yeah, I've done Yeoman generators, I've done slush generators. Actually, I have a slush generator for phaser 2. That's perfectly fine. You could pull it down and use it right now. But I wanted to experiment with this this new way of organizing a project similar to how Create React app works, where you basically just kind of do templating and stuff inside of scripts. And so no, it's not a Yeoman generator, but it will be a generator. So that's the answer to your question.
Where'd you get your sprites from?
I made everything. Everything you saw is my stuff. Like, yeah, I'll show you. So like this, I made in a thing called Pixel Edit. This. Some things took longer than others, yeah. Like for this gradient, like I actually clicked all that in. This one, I've been trying to work out a pipeline with Blender and a shader that I wrote to result in kind of a pixel art style. So I'm trying to kind of like do a little bit of both to speed up the process. And as a result, I feel like it kind of looks like those old Rare titles, you know, like Donkey Kong and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a cool effect. For Griffin, I clicked out most of that except for the main guy. So yeah, here I'll show you the. There we go. Yeah, so you know most of this stuff there's some programs like Sprite and Pixel Edit And you can even provision Photoshop. But if you go into Photoshop, it's a really smoke and power tool, but you've got to turn off, set everything to nearest neighbor instead, for your aliasing mode, turn off anti-aliasing on everything, or it'll become fuzzy. And the other thing is inside of Phaser 3, there's a switch called Pixel Edit Mode, and then there's also this list of a whole bunch of obscure browser commands that will, CSS, like obviously MS Filter and Moz this, and just basically every single vendor you can think of has some command that will set aliasing to nearest neighbor instead of whatever other thing that it's doing. So if you turn all that on, like when I first made Griffin and like the canvas expanded to the full size, it was kind of fuzzy, and then you turned it on, it was like pop, and then suddenly it had that nice pixely Virtual Boy look that I was kind of going for. So, thank you. Awesome. The whole reason I'm doing this is so I can write music for a video game. That's why I even went to music school. See, this is basically my whole life. It's like, I want to write music for video games. Oh man, I guess I'm gonna have to learn how to program. I guess I'm gonna learn how to make a game. There's not really a lot of community in Oklahoma. I guess I'll start an organization for that. And now, finally, in my mid-30s, I'm like, I could probably write music for a video game. But the journey is what's important, not the destination, right? You were asking about the pixel art stuff. So, actually, it might be in here. Yeah, check these guys out. I sure can. I always hit Control first on Mac. And I'm like, oh yeah, look at that pixel art black magic that I would have never gone through every single, Moz crisp edges. How many people use that from day to day? Oh yeah, let's put that Moz crisp edges on there. Image rendering, pixelated. That was the secret sauce. It does sound delicious. And actually, that's one of the reasons. So I started working on Griffin, which I wanted to make a game that was a very distinctly Oklahoman game. That's one of the reasons I started that project. And then quickly realized, like, oh my gosh, the hardest part of doing HTML5 games development, with Unity, you're just like, I want a plugin. I click the button, there it is, right? It's really great. Actually, when the Unity Asset Store first came out, I made a rustic farm windmill. I made one thing, and I've sold 3. It was great. Yeah, like I was like literally out with Amanda one day, and it was like, and like alerted me, and I sold one. I saw my PayPal account go up by $7, and I was like, oh yeah, bling bling, windmill money, here it comes. And I released this like maybe it was like an attempt to learn Blender and stuff like that. I didn't really stick with it, but since then the Asset Store has gone nuts. So HTML5 game development, okay, well all that stuff is there. It's just kind of sprawled out. So one of the goals of Create Phaser app there's one of the features is Create Phaser Jetpack. We want to make a small web app that launches alongside the game that it is meant to collate a lot of this stuff. So for instance, the tile extruder, there's a command line thing that'll fix your tiles. Well, it'd be really nice if that was just a command line process, or you could like click a button, it would like, take all your tile maps and just copy them over, and they're already extruded and your game looks in this other directory, right? So the big idea is because there is a little bit of context switching and time that you can lose. But on the other hand, it's free, it'll run on the web, it's really interesting. You really are using bleeding edge technology when you're using this stuff, because even though it's not as fancy in 3D as some of the other engines, it's running in your browser. Like, which I know seeing 3D in and of itself in your browser is not interesting, but it's finally got to the masses. Like, we can all make HTML games right now, and there's actually really good tooling for it. And Phaser 3 is kind of the best one that's out right now, so it's really, really exciting. Yes? So yeah, so two dimensions is what matters right now for it. However, that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. There are actually some pretty cool like things you can do with parallax and things like that. To remember like Mod 7 from Super Nintendo, like some of those kinds of effects. You can do it top down, like Legend of Zelda sort of. Yeah, you can do something like that, no problem. Absolutely no problem. You just make your sprite sheet, everything looks top down, and then when you make your tile map, it's top down. So that would work just fine. Right now, I've been tailoring it to side scrollers first, just because I've got to start somewhere. But it would be really nice if we could get to a point where, and like I said, this is kind of the dream, when you scaffold you could scaffold it with like, if you have isometric or something like that, in mind. So, okay, so that's, keep an eye on that. It's a relatively new project for me. So like it's literally in like 0.00, it's not even on release 1 yet, right? It is a boilerplate that will become a generator, so that's how new it is. But the goal is to build a very solid boilerplate first and then convert it to a generator, so that way there's not that additional development friction in the process. Oh, it's not implemented yet. I've got all the animations there, I just gotta like add them. Actually, there's also an issue to refactor the animation into the state machine that I just told you about. So these tips are hot off the press, my dude. If you'd like to open a pull request and do that for me, and we've come full circle. That's right. So I don't have time for any more questions, but thank you all for coming to OKc.js, and I hope that all of you consider giving a lightning talk at the next one, which we usually do a talk, and then a lightning talk. So every 3 months. So 3 months from now, I want all of you to think about what little thing do I know that someone else might want to know. September? Are we really that late in the year? Yeah, I guess it is September, isn't it? Okay. All of you should give a lightning talk in September. But hurry, because we picked the first 4 or 5, right? Yeah. That's okay, but if you sign up and there's no space, you just go to the next one. We do it 4 times a year. So. That's right. So I would have gotten bumped, because I've given lots of talks over the years. All right. That's all I got. Thanks, y'all.